Stay back!
I'm still here.
It's correct. Come on out here. Stay back!
Address me.
You just fucking shoot me, honestly.
I'm not shooting you. Drop the knife for me. Drop the knife. Drop the knife!
It started as a normal Thursday afternoon in Cambridge, Maryland, the kind of day when the waterfront glimmers quietly and neighbors nod to each other without a second thought. But by 5 p.m., that peace was shattered by the sound of sirens, screams, and the kind of chaos that turns an ordinary street into a scene from a nightmare.
What's your name? Hey, stay back.
556, I'm still here. Can you get me out there? Correct, come on out here.
That's what we're trying to do. Okay, just stand back.
Drop the knife. Drop the knife. Drop the knife.
Shots fired, shots fired.
A woman was running, terrified, near the intersection of Seaway Lane and Riverside Wharf. Behind her, a man clutching a knife. Witnesses could only watch, frozen in disbelief, as someone dialed 911, their voice trembling, begging for help before it was too late. Moments later, Cambridge police officers arrived on the scene. What they found was every officer's worst nightmare: an armed suspect, a distressed victim, and seconds to make a life-or-death decision. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, one man was dead, another was injured, and an entire community was left asking the same haunting question. What really happened that day on Seaway Lane? Because in those few chaotic minutes, between the first desperate call and the final echo of gunfire, something went terribly wrong. And now, Maryland's Independent Investigations Division wants to find out exactly why.
Yep.
It was 5:12 p.m. when the call came in. A shaky voice on the other end of the line told dispatchers that a man was chasing a woman with a knife near Seaway Lane and Riverside Wharf, two streets that usually only hear the sound of waves brushing the shore and the distant hum of traffic. But this call wasn't about noise. It was a cry for help. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "Stay on the line. Help is on the way." But you could hear the fear through the phone. The caller described the man's face: angry, desperate, the kind of look that tells you this isn't a random argument. Something deeper was going on. Within moments, the radio crackled across the Cambridge Police Department. Patrol units were dispatched. Sirens flared. Officers raced through town, not knowing exactly what they were driving into, just that someone's life might depend on how fast they got there. Neighbors peeked out from their porches as the squad cars sped past. A few even began recording, unaware that what they were capturing would soon become part of a much bigger story. And as those first responders arrived, stepping out of their vehicles and into the humid September air, they found themselves staring at a man gripping a knife, refusing to back down.
Stay back!
Address me.
You just fucking shoot me, honestly.
I'm not shooting you. Drop the knife for me. Drop the knife. Drop the knife!
The tension was instant. Commands were shouted. Tasers were drawn. But as the situation spiraled, one thing became clear: this wasn't going to end peacefully. Because no one knew it yet, but those next few seconds would decide everything. The first patrol cars came to a screeching halt near Riverside Wharf. The air was thick with tension, the kind you can almost feel pressing against your chest. Officers stepped out cautiously, hands hovering near their holsters, eyes locked on the suspect. There he was, an adult man, standing in the middle of the street, gripping a knife. His knuckles white, his breathing uneven. The woman he'd been chasing had managed to slip away, trembling behind a parked car, her cries echoing through the narrow lane. Officers shouted commands, "Drop the knife!" over and over, their voices clashing with the distant rush of water from the wharf. But the man didn't move. His eyes darted between the officers, wild and unsteady, as if weighing his next move. Then, one of the officers fired a taser. A sharp crack, a flash of wires, and nothing. No reaction. The man flinched but stayed on his feet, knife still in hand. Another taser shot followed, but again, no effect. The electricity seemed to bounce off him like it wasn't there. Now, it wasn't just tense, it was dangerous. The man took a step forward. Then another. The officers began to retreat, shouting louder, their voices growing more desperate with each second. Every breath felt like a countdown. Every movement, a gamble. And then, without warning, the man charged. What happened next would change everything.
Drop the knife! Drop the knife! Drop the knife! Stop! Chamber, start the EMS now!
The moment the man lunged forward, time seemed to slow down. One officer stumbled back, his boots scraping against the pavement, trying to create space. The man's face twisted with something between rage and desperation, eyes locked on the officer, knife raised. The officers shouted again, "Stop! Drop it!" But their voices were swallowed by the chaos. The sound of shouting, running, and panic blurred into one. The woman screamed from behind the car, her voice trembling with terror. In those few heartbeats, every option ran out. The tasers had failed. The distance was closing. And the officer, now just a few feet away, had seconds to decide. Then came the shot. A single crack that split the evening air and echoed off the nearby buildings. The man stumbled, the knife slipping from his hand as he collapsed onto the street. For a moment, everything went still. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the sirens in the distance seemed to fade. The officer stood frozen, weapon lowered, staring at what had just happened, the reality sinking in. It had taken only seconds, but the consequences would last far longer. Because what happened next would shift the focus from a street confrontation to a full-scale investigation, one that would question every decision made in those final moments. The shot echoed through the quiet streets of Cambridge, and then there was only silence. A heavy, eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air long after the sound had faded. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, everything erupted at once. Officers rushed forward, kneeling beside the man now lying motionless on the pavement. One officer called for medics. Another retrieved a trauma kit. The tension that had filled the air just moments earlier turned into something else: urgency, fear, disbelief. They began CPR, their voices trembling as they counted compressions. Others cleared the area, trying to keep bystanders back as phones recorded from every direction. The woman who had been chased stood frozen, tears streaking her face, whispering prayers under her breath. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, taking over the scene. They worked quickly, lifting the man onto a stretcher and rushing him to a nearby hospital. But despite every effort, the news came back fast: he didn't make it. One of the officers was also transported to the hospital, treated for non-life-threatening injuries. Still, the emotional toll was far heavier than any physical wound. As the flashing lights faded and the crowd slowly dispersed, Cambridge was left in stunned quiet. A community that had witnessed something it never expected, a fatal encounter in broad daylight, right on their own streets. But as the city tried to process what had just happened, another chapter was already beginning. Because not long after that final siren faded, investigators from the Maryland Attorney General's office were on their way, ready to uncover the truth behind every second of that deadly confrontation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, flashing lights still painted the streets of Cambridge in red and blue. But this time, it wasn't just patrol cars on scene, it was investigators. The Maryland office of the Attorney General's Independent Investigations Division, or IID, had arrived. Their mission was clear: uncover the truth behind the officer-involved shooting that had shaken Dorchester County to its core. Unlike local departments, the IID operates with distance, no emotional ties, no hometown loyalty. Their job is to examine the facts, step by step, with every detail under the microscope. They began documenting the scene, photographing the street, collecting shell casings, and securing the officer's body-worn cameras. Every second of that encounter would now be reviewed frame by frame. The taser failures, the commands shouted, the final moments before the shot, everything was evidence. At police headquarters, officers involved were separated and interviewed individually. Each one had to relive those 10 seconds, explaining what they saw, what they felt, and why that shot was fired. It wasn't just about what happened, it was about whether every move followed protocol. The IID made it clear they would release the name of the decedent and the discharging officer within 2 business days, unless delays were necessary under their protocol. Transparency was key, but so was accuracy. And then came another promise. Within 20 business days, the public would see what the cameras captured. The raw truth, unfiltered and unedited, once families had been given a chance to view it first. But until that footage came out, the only thing the public had were questions. And those questions were growing louder by the hour. By the next morning, Cambridge wasn't just a quiet riverside town anymore, it was the center of attention. News crews rolled in, headlines spread online, and social media lit up with one burning question. Was this shooting justified? For some, the answer seemed clear. The man had a knife. The officers had shouted commands. The tasers failed. They saw it as a tragedy, but a necessary one. A moment where an officer was forced to make an impossible choice. But for others, the story didn't sit right. They asked, why didn't the tasers work? Could officers have used another tactic? Was there a way to end this without bloodshed? Different voices, different emotions, and all of them demanding answers. Outside City Hall, quiet gatherings began to form. Some carried signs calling for transparency. Others simply stood in silence, heads bowed, waiting for the truth to come out. Because in situations like this, silence can speak louder than words. Even among officers, the mood was heavy. They train for moments like this, but nothing prepares them for living with it afterward. The split-second decisions. The replaying of every command shouted, every movement made. The what-ifs. Meanwhile, online forums and community pages buzzed with rumors, some claiming to have insider info, others spinning wild theories about what the footage might show. But no one really knew. And that's what made it worse. Because when the facts are slow to arrive, speculation fills the gaps, and every version of the story seems to grow bigger, louder, and more divisive. And as the waiting continued, people began to ask the question that's haunted every officer involved shooting in America. Where's the line between protecting the public and pulling the trigger too soon? When stories like this make headlines, they're never just about one city, or one officer, or one suspect. They become part of something bigger. A national conversation that seems to replay every few months in a different town, with different names, but the same haunting questions. In Cambridge, the investigation continues. Evidence is reviewed, statements are analyzed, and a community waits for closure that might never truly come. But beyond the crime scene tape and the official reports lies a deeper truth, one that's harder to write down in a file or capture on a camera. Because what happened on Seaway Lane wasn't just a clash between a man and the police. It was a collision of fear, training, human instinct, and the unpredictable chaos of the real world. Officers are trained to make life-and-death decisions in seconds. But those seconds don't just disappear. They live on, in memory, in public debate, and in the conscience of everyone involved. The Independent Investigations Division will eventually release its findings. The footage will surface, the public will judge, and the headlines will move on. But for the people of Cambridge, and for anyone watching, this story leaves behind something that can't be measured in reports or statistics. It's the reminder that behind every officer-involved shooting headline are real people, with families, with fears, with lives forever changed. So maybe the real question isn't just what happened that afternoon. Maybe it's why these moments keep happening at all, and what it will take for communities and law enforcement to finally bridge the space between fear and understanding. Because in the end, every story like this isn't just about one gunshot. It's about trust, truth, and the thin, fragile line between safety and tragedy.